This is a CBS News special report. I'm Norah O'Donnell in Washington. Tonight, we will witness history. It's been more than 50 years since a sitting president decided not to seek a second term. President Biden in the Oval Office right now will explain why he quit the presidential race. These are his first public remarks since making that announcement and endorsing Vice President Kamala Harris. Tonight's speech comes at a momentous time in American history. Less than 2 months ago, former President Trump was convicted on 34 fraud charges. Then there was President Biden's disastrous debate performance in Atlanta. And just 11 days ago, Trump survived an assassination attempt. All of these events leading to Sunday's announcement and tonight's address to the nation. Mr. Biden, we are told, will say, quote, "The defense of democracy is more important than any title. This sacred task of perfecting our union is not about me. It's about you, your families, your futures. It's about we, the people." He's also expected to elaborate tonight on what lies ahead, how he's going to finish the job for the American people, in his words. There's still 6 months left in his presidency, and we know that there are many challenges left for him to tackle in office, including 2 wars, the U.S. southern border, and the migration crisis and inflation. Here now, the president.
My fellow Americans, I'm speaking to you tonight from behind the resolute desk in the Oval Office. In this sacred space, I'm surrounded by portraits of extraordinary American presidents. Thomas Jefferson wrote the immortal words that guide this nation. George Washington, who showed us presidents are not kings. Abraham Lincoln, who implored us to reject malice. Franklin Roosevelt, who inspired us to reject fear. I revere this office, but I love my country more. It's been the honor of my life to serve as your president. But in the defense of democracy, which is at stake, I think is more important than any title. I draw strength and I find joy in working for the American people. But this sacred task of perfecting our union is not about me. It's about you, your families, your futures. It's about we, the people. And we can never forget that. And I never have. I've made it clear that I believe America is at an inflection point. One of those rare moments in history when the decisions we make now will determine our fate of our nation and the world for decades to come. America's going to have to choose between moving forward or backward, between hope and hate, between unity and division. We have to decide, do we still believe in honesty, decency, respect, freedom, justice, and democracy? In this moment, we can see those we disagree with not as enemies, but as fellow Americans. Can we do that? Does character in public life still matter? I believe I know the answer to these questions because I know you, the American people. And I know this: we are a great nation because we are good people. When you elected me to this office, I promised to always level with you, to tell you the truth. And the truth, the sacred cause of this country, is larger than any one of us. And those of us who cherish that cause cherish it so much. A cause of American democracy itself. We must unite to protect it. You know, in recent weeks, it's become clear to me that I need to unite my party in this critical endeavor. I believe my record as president, my leadership in the world, my vision for America's future, all merited a second term. But nothing can come in the way of saving our democracy. That includes personal ambition. So I've decided the best way forward is to pass the torch to a new generation. That's the best way to unite our nation. You know, there is a time and a place for long years of experience in public life. But there's also a time and a place for new voices, fresh voices, yes, younger voices. And that time and place is now. Over the next 6 months, I'll be focused on doing my job as president. That means I'll continue to lower costs for hardworking families, grow our economy. I'll keep defending our personal freedoms and our civil rights from the right to vote to the right to choose. I'll keep calling out hate and extremism. Make it clear there is no place in America for political violence or any violence ever, period. I'm going to keep speaking out to protect our kids from gun violence, our planet from climate crisis that is the existential threat. And I will keep fighting for my cancer moonshot so we can end cancer as we know it, because we can do it. And I'm going to call for Supreme Court reform, because this is critical to our democracy, Supreme Court reform. You know, I will keep working to ensure America remains strong and secure and the leader of the free world. I'm the first president in this century to report to the American people that the United States is not at war anywhere in the world. We'll keep rallying a coalition of proud nations to stop Putin from taking over Ukraine and doing more damage. We'll keep NATO stronger, and I'll make it more powerful and more united than any time in all of our history. I'll keep doing the same for our allies in the Pacific. You know, when I came to office, the conventional wisdom was that China would inevitably surpass the United States. That's not the case anymore. And I'm going to keep working to end the war in Gaza, bring home all the hostages, and bring peace and security to the Middle East and end this war. We're also working around the clock to bring home Americans being unjustly detained all around the world. You know, we've come so far since my inauguration. On that day, I told you, as I stood in that winter, we stood in a winter of peril and a winter of possibilities. Peril and possibilities. We were in the grip of the worst pandemic in the century, the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression, the worst attack on our democracy since the Civil War. But we came together as Americans, and we got through it. We emerged stronger, more prosperous, and more secure. Today, we have the strongest economy in the world, creating nearly 16 million new jobs, a record. Wages are up. Inflation continues to come down. The racial wealth gap is the lowest it's been in 20 years. We're literally rebuilding our entire nation, urban, suburban, rural, and tribal communities. Manufacturing has come back to America. We're leading the world again in chips and science and innovation. We finally beat Big Pharma after all these years to lower the cost of prescription drugs for seniors. And I'm going to keep fighting to make sure we lower the cost for everyone, not just seniors. More people have health care today in America than ever before. And I signed one of the most significant laws helping millions of veterans and their families who are exposed to toxic materials. You know, the most significant climate law ever in the history of the world. The first major gun safety law in 30 years. And today, the violent crime rate is at a 50-year low. We're also securing our border. Border crossings are lower today than when the previous administration left office. I've kept my commitment to appoint the first black woman to the Supreme Court of the United States of America. I also kept my commitment to have an administration that looks like America and be a president for all Americans. That's what I've done. I ran for president 4 years ago because I believed and still do that the soul of America was at stake. The very nature of who we are was at stake. And that's still the case. America's an idea. An idea stronger than any army, bigger than any ocean, more powerful than any dictator or tyrant. It's the most powerful idea in the history of the world. That idea is that we hold these truths to be self-evident. We're all created equal, endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights: life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. We've never fully lived up to it, to this sacred idea, but we've never walked away from it either. And I do not believe the American people will walk away from it now. In just a few months, the American people will choose the course of America's future. I made my choice. I've made my views known. I would like to thank our great Vice President Kamala Harris. She's experienced. She's tough. She's capable. She's been an incredible partner to me and a leader for our country. Now the choice is up to you, the American people. When you make that choice, remember the words of Benjamin Franklin that's hanging on my wall here in the Oval Office, alongside the busts of Dr. King and Rosa Parks and Cesar Chavez. When Ben Franklin was asked, as he emerged from the convention going on, whether the founders have given America a monarchy or republic, Franklin's response was, a republic, if you can keep it. A republic, if you can keep it. Whether we keep our republic is now in your hands. My fellow Americans, it's been the privilege of my life to serve this nation for over 50 years. Nowhere else on earth could a kid with a stutter, from modest beginnings in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and Claremont, Delaware, one day sit behind the resolute desk in the Oval Office as President of the United States. But here I am. That's what's so special about America. We're a nation of promise and possibilities, of dreamers and doers, of ordinary Americans doing extraordinary things. I've given my heart and my soul to our nation, like so many others. I've been blessed a million times in return with the love and support of the American people. I hope you have some idea how grateful I am to all of you. The great thing about America is here, kings and dictators do not rule, the people do. History is in your hands. The power is in your hands. The idea of America lies in your hands. We just have to keep faith, keep the faith, and remember who we are. We're the United States of America, and there's simply nothing beyond our capacity when we do it together. So let's act together, preserve our democracy. God bless you all, and may God protect our troops. Thank you.
And there we have it, the President of the United States, President Joe Biden, this historic moment that we are witnessing together, and a speech that met that moment in its soaring rhetoric in defense of democracy, saying nothing can stand in the way of saving our democracy, and that includes personal ambition. Want to bring in our chief political analyst, John Dickerson. This is a speech no president wants to give. And it hasn't been a similar one in 50 years where he has to say, I'm not running for a second term.
No, and you can imagine, Nora, the weekend when he made this decision, President Biden, sick with COVID, recognizing this is the end of his career, his life in politics, that just how heavy that must have been. But tonight he marshaled all of that and said, that my personal ambition is not bigger than the stakes. And the stakes are, several different apocalyptic versions of what would happen should Democrats lose this election. And what was at stake included things like, does character in public life still matter? So he set the stakes, then put it all in the American voters' hands. It's all in your hands. You have to make, he seemed to be saying explicitly and implicitly to American voters, you have to make a momentous decision like the one I just made. And then, of course, the personal reference to himself as a kid with a stutter. You have the most powerful man in the world suddenly shrinking himself to a little kid as a way to tell the story of the promise of America, that no matter what your beginnings, you can end up in the Oval Office. Some soaring rhetoric for a president not necessarily known for that kind of rhetoric.
He also said, do we still believe in honesty and decency? That was right before that line you just mentioned. Does character in public life still matter? That's clearly a reference to Donald Trump.
Absolutely. Not just the office, not just the foreign policy challenges, not just opportunity and whether it exists in America anymore, but whether the stuff inside of the American story, honesty, character, decency, respect, that's all on the table, too. I mean, he put all the different chips and stakes in the center of the table tonight. Robert
Costa, and you heard that emphatic endorsement of his vice president, and also noting it's time for a generational change, which the Democratic Party, but many in the base, have wanted.
And President Biden tonight adopting the rhetoric of one of his heroes, the late President John F. Kennedy, passing the torch to a new generation of Americans, a new generation of leadership inside the Democratic Party. Ahead of this speech tonight, I've been speaking with some of his closest advisors, and there has always been a tension at the heart of the Biden presidency. He is so ambitious, and he talked about that tonight. I always think about March 1st, 2021, Nora, he brought in senators to the Oval Office, and he looked up at the portrait of FDR on the wall, and he said, that's where we're going. He wanted to have a New Deal-sized presidency on domestic policy and on foreign policy. He wanted to be truly in command. But the tension has always been, with that ambition, has always been why he got into the race in the first place. Donald Trump. Charlottesville in 2017, the white supremacist march pulled him back into the riptide of politics. He decides to run in his political winter, and it is Donald Trump's ascendancy once again, which is making him move toward this decision to leave the Democratic presidential race.
And Ed, you cover the White House, and in talking to the president's advisors, right, that FDR model. And he has had a legislatively successful presidency, reaching bipartisan achievements in many ways. And yet he has struggled to communicate that.
He has. And listening to what he wanted to work on in these final 6 months, it's a gargantuan list: inflation, the economy, civil rights and abortion rights, fighting extremism, gun control, climate change, his cancer moonshot project.
Middle East peace.
Middle East peace, which may be on the verge of a real breakthrough in the coming days. But what has always been the case with this president, from his campaign to tonight, is the editorial consistency, if you will, of his words and his mission. We're the United States of America. There's nothing we can do if we don't do it. Every single speech ends that way. But tying his inaugural to this farewell address, to talk about the winter of peril and the winter of possibilities, and hearkening back to that again today. One of the people he's been working with over the last several days, of course, is Mike Donnellan, his longtime speechwriter, who sits there with him and says, how do we tie all these things together? Remember, you're fighting for the soul of the nation. Tonight, pretty good capstone to all that work, if, in fact, this is the last speech many Americans remember from him.
I want to bring in our chief White House correspondent, Nancy Cordes. And Nancy, want to get your reaction to the president's remarks tonight.
Nora, we're getting a little bit of color from inside the Oval Office while this speech was taking place. And you've been in the Oval Office yourself many times. It's not that large of a room, but we're told that 39 people were crammed in there with the president to watch and pay tribute this evening as he gave this very difficult speech. Chief among them, his wife, Dr. Jill Biden, his children, Ashley Biden, Hunter Biden, and several of his grandchildren. This is a president who is famously close to his family, and we know that his family members, from our reporting, were among those who were pushing him to stay in the race as long as he was willing to do it. So it's a difficult moment for him, a difficult moment for his family. And in fact, Ashley Biden, his daughter, we're told, had her eyes closed and was nodding silently and breathing deeply as her father spoke. And at one point, she even dabbed her eyes with the sleeve of her shirt. This is a 51-year career here in Washington for President Biden that will be coming to an end now in 6 months in a way that no one in the family thought it would.
There's more to talk about with the president's remarks tonight, but I also want to mention that Donald Trump is in Charlotte, North Carolina tonight, where he took credit for Joe Biden dropping out of the race. I want to bring in CBS's Nicole Killian. She was there for the rally. And Nicole, I was able to listen to part of it, and he pretty much said tonight, no more Mr. Nice Guy.
Yeah, that's right. And look, the president, former president, just ended his speech here in Charlotte. But before his speech, one of his aides told me that he would address President Biden tonight, given that he was making this speech at the White House. But when I asked if he would be more gracious or more pointed in his comments, the aide told me, well, he's just going to be Trump. And that's exactly what we saw from the former president tonight. He said that we defeated President Biden when he exited the race 3 days ago and suggested the Democratic Party leaders pushed him out. But he did make that hard pivot, really focusing the bulk of his speech on Vice President Kamala Harris, at times mispronouncing her name. Take a listen.
For 3.5 years, Lion Kamala Harris has been the ultra-liberal driving force behind every single Biden catastrophe. She is a radical left lunatic who will destroy our country.
So Trump continued to argue that Vice President Harris is unfit to lead. He went on to, as you heard him there, really tried to paint her to the left, the extreme left, saying that she is more liberal than President Biden, more liberal than Bernie Sanders. He called her a border czar, which is a phrase we're hearing Republicans use more often. He said that she is not tough on crime and tried to counter that by unveiling a new endorsement tonight from the National Association of Police Organizations. So it was quite a litany of attacks that the former president had against the vice president, and certainly a sign of things to come over the next 100 days of this election, Nora.
Nicole Killian in Charlotte for us. Thank you very much. And ahead, Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker will join us, and we'll look at the potential Democratic vice presidential candidates, including Governor Pritzker.
As you know, 3 days ago, we officially defeated the worst president in the history of our country, crooked Joe Biden. So now we have a new victim to defeat, Lion Kamala Harris, Lion, L-Y-I-N apostrophe.
On the night that President Biden gave that historic speech, that was from the former president at his rally in Charlotte tonight. One person mentioned as a potential vice presidential candidate for the Democratic Party is Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker. Governor, good to see you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Great to be here.
I do want to talk about the president in just a moment, but I want to give you the opportunity to respond to those attacks tonight from Donald Trump, who is calling the vice president a radical left lunatic who will destroy our country.
Look, that's all they've got is name calling. You know, we're talking about a woman who's going to stand up for women's reproductive rights, who has had a long history of standing up for workers' rights and voting rights and civil rights. And Donald Trump, of course, believes in none of those things and is on the attack against just average, everyday working people across the United States. So I think the contrast is clear. They're going to throw invectives. We're going to talk about the issues.
Governor Pritzker, I know you listened to President Biden tonight from the Oval Office and know him well. It was a soaring speech where he talked about nothing can stand in the way of saving our democracy. That includes my personal ambition, and talked about the stakes in that race. What did you make of his remarks?
You know, I have to say, I listened to it, and there was a particular part of it where he talked about, democracy being more important than one person. It's about the American people. And I can't imagine Donald Trump ever saying anything like that. Remember that Joe Biden has spent 50 years serving the public, not for his own interests, but to make sure that the working families of America have someone that they can rely upon in public office. That's been Joe Biden. He's a person of honesty and integrity, and we should all be proud that we've elected a president like this and look at all that he's accomplished. I know that earlier in your program you talked about, some of your guests talked about the allusion to FDR and all that he accomplished. Think about what Joe Biden did in just 3.5 years, getting bipartisan legislation passed, not just on gun safety and protecting a woman's right to choose, but think about the big issues like CHIPS and Science Act and the infrastructure bill, and of course the Inflation Reduction Act, and the way that he fought climate change and made sure that we're bringing manufacturing back to the United States. I mean, I'm proud of all that he's accomplished. We all should be, and we should want to elect somebody going forward who's a believer in those values and in carrying on not only the traditions of FDR, but the ones that have been established by Joe Biden, too.
He also had this turn of phrase where he said there's a time and place for long years of experience, but there's also a time and place for new voices, fresh voices, yes, younger voices, and that time and place is now. Has this decision united the party? How has it changed the party?
Well, part of it is that Joe Biden being willing to make this sacrifice of his own career and future because he believes in democracy. I'm so proud of that. And I must say that in Kamala Harris, we have the kind of person who's going to carry on a tradition of democratic values that most Americans really believe in. And she's somebody that's going to make sure that we take that case to the American public in a way that is so hard for the Republicans to respond to that you've seen all they've got is invectives to throw. So I'm very proud of what we're going to see going forward over the next, 100 days of this campaign. And I do believe that the prosecutor is going to be able to prosecute the case against the 34-time felon accused of and convicted of fraud.
And Governor Pritzker, it's been reported today that you spoke with Kamala Harris on the phone. You're on the list as a possible vice presidential candidate. Did you talk about being her running mate?
Look, I'm not going to talk about the private conversations that I've had. As you know, I've been traveling the country, making the case for Democrats all across these great United States. I'm going to continue to do that until Election Day and beyond. And I must say that, again, Kamala Harris has energized the party. I think we're all excited about the opportunity going forward to make this case, to win back all the voters that, well, frankly, weren't so turned on by both candidates, but now see Kamala Harris as a real opportunity to carry this country forward.
Governor Pritzker of Illinois, good to see you, and we'll be in your state in August for the Democratic Convention.
It'll be a great summer in Chicago.
We'll see you soon. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Vetting a vice presidential candidate usually takes months, but today the Democratic Party said that Kamala Harris will have to name her running mate by August 7th. And CBS News can report that the Harris campaign is considering about a dozen contenders. That list includes governors, a senator, and those who aren't in elected office, including some cabinet secretaries. Want to bring back in Nancy Cordes, who is at the White House. And Nancy, walk through some of the governors that have been discussed, in addition to Governor Pritzker, who we just talked to.
Well, Nora, I'm just getting my microphone back on because we went running to investigate.
Nope.
We hear some big cheers behind us.
No, well, you know what? Then hold on. I'll bring in Robert Costa next to talk about some of the other governors, too. Governor Beshear has been mentioned.
Let's bring up that list again of all the contenders here. We'll go through them very quickly. Governor Beshear of Kentucky is near the top of the list. Youthful, could maybe bring the South into play for the Democrats. But you also have the Sun Belt in Arizona, really on the radar for Democrats. So Senator Mark Kelly, married to Gabrielle Giffords, who was survived an assassination attempt. He's a former astronaut, and so he's someone they really believe could bring people into the coalition from Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, that part of the country. It's a tough strategic choice, though, for Vice President Harris when she looks at the map. Does she want to play in the Sun Belt? Does she want to play in the Deep South? Democrats have made gains in places like North Carolina, especially in Georgia, with 2 Senate seats. But it's also about personality, character. Who does she connect with? Who does she have a personal relationship with? I'm told she is close with Senator Kelly, but there's also the possibility somebody from the outside, though retired Admiral McRaven, Bill McRaven, who oversaw the bin Laden raid, he's taken himself out of consideration at this point. But there is a thought inside the White House, maybe broaden the net at this point of the discussion.
Is it about personality or is it about something more, especially in a tight contest like this? Mark Kelly, would he bring Arizona and its 11 electoral votes? Or does she need Governor Shapiro for the 20 electoral votes and the must-win state of Pennsylvania?
And that's part of the calculation between her and the senior staff of the campaign, because they still see ways to win both those areas. The blue wall, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. Maybe Minnesota has to be worried about too now because the Trump surge has kind of started, or he's at least seeing some growth. And then the Sun Belt, Nevada, Arizona. There's concern about New Mexico. Do you need to bring someone from there? And what would it be like to have 2 Westerners, essentially, on the ticket? That would be new as well. So all of those things are factors, but perhaps the biggest one is going to be if she's a prosecutor and a senator and someone who's been a vice president from the West, from an urban area, do you perhaps have to worry about geography and where someone else can bring in some more votes?
And you have to engage in the age-old debate about whether vice presidential candidates really matter at all. Now, as soon as I say that, there was a time when people said, well, you know, debates don't matter either. Debates matter. Yeah. So nevertheless, you have to figure out that question. And one thing about Kelly that has been, somebody's mentioned to me about why he might be an attractive candidate, is because we can see from Donald Trump's speech and already the attack lines from Republicans is they're trying to say Kamala Harris is the other. She is someone else outside of the American story. If you pair that with an astronaut, there's nothing more at the center of the American story than an astronaut. So in that sense,
mother was a cop. Yeah.
And so in that sense, the pick helps you with the central candidate. So that's a way to think about this too.
Yeah, I want to bring back in Nancy Cordes with the microphone on, Nancy, because I know you've been doing a lot of reporting on this too.
No problem. I mean, just to explain to you what just happened, the reason I ripped the microphone off was because suddenly we were standing here and heard this huge cheer from behind us in the direction of the Rose Garden, and then heard the president's voice saying, hello, hello, hello. And so we went running to investigate and see what was going on. It turns out that hundreds of White House staffers stayed late here at the White House this evening to gather together to watch the president's speech. And then it sounds like they went either over to the South Lawn or into the Rose Garden. After the speech, the president emerged from the Oval Office and greeted them. And we couldn't hear much of what he was saying. We could just hear the crowd periodically cheering. These are people who have worked for President Biden, in some cases a few years, in some cases decades. He is beloved here. And it's really been a bittersweet time for staffers here who are glad that he has made a decision, but also feel pretty sad about the way that things have turned out. And so I just wanted to fill you in a little bit on that moment, which was a kind of an interesting and bittersweet moment happening here at the White House. Now, back to what you've all been talking about, which is the hunt for a vice president. What we learned today is that the list of potential VP candidates that are being vetted in earnest is about a dozen, maybe 11, maybe 13. They include many of the governors that you've been discussing, a couple of cabinet secretaries as well. And there are also a couple of people on the list, I'm told, who are not in elective office right now. We're working to learn who those individuals might be, but we're told that some of the people who are being looked at began having conversations with the vetting team yesterday. They're on a compressed timeline. They want to get this done within the next couple of weeks.
Nancy Cordes with all that reporting. Thank you very much. And ahead, we'll talk more about the president's historic speech tonight.
But this sacred task of perfecting our union is not about me. It's about you, your families, your futures. It's about we, the people. And we can never forget that. And I never have.
The president tonight saying, I revere this office, but I love my country more. For the first time, addressing the American people and explaining why he wanted to step down from re-election. John Dickerson, it was a remarkable speech, a historic speech.
And a deeply personal speech. He had to do three things. He had to talk about the personal reasons, also talk about the stakes and set them up, connect those two, and then create a path for his vice president. And when he talks about the future, when you watch Vice President Harris talk about the future, because of her age, because she is that new generation that he talked about, it's much easier for her to talk about the future. She conveys future, whereas that was always very difficult for him. This is only the fourth Oval Office speech. This will be the one everyone remembers.
Mm-hmm. Robert, I'm also just struck how much he talked about character in public office.
He underscored character at every turn, and he avoided the reality of this moment, which is that this was a very painful decision for President Biden to make. His family, as Nancy reported, in the Oval Office with him. They were with him in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware, last weekend, thinking through, could he find a way to stay in this race? Because for President Biden, you talk to his family, his closest advisors, he was counted out from day one in his 20s, in law school, making his way up the ranks in Delaware, runs for the Senate at the age of 29, surprises everyone by winning in 1972, surprises everyone when he endures personal tragedy with the death of his wife and daughter, serves in the Senate. I've talked to some of his colleagues in the Senate. They said he was discounted in the Senate. Some of the older senators thought he was a nobody, a kid. Took him decades to formulate his own presence in the United States Senate. He flames out in 1988, deals with an aneurysm, a plagiarism scandal. He always has pushed back against those who say Biden can't make it. Biden's not major league level in politics. He just trudges forward. And he was going to trudge forward again. But he relented this time because he likes to associate, as he did at the top of the speech, with the grander idea of America and American presidential history. He wants to be remembered clearly as someone who put character above personal ambition.
And that is in many ways what will continue to be fought out on the campaign trail. Want to point out tonight something that John noticed on X, which is a tweet. What do we call it now on X? Another way, something on X.
Who knows?
Post on X, yes, by Jill Biden, in which she talks about thanking those who never wavered, to those who refused to doubt, to those who always believed. My heart is full of gratitude. Thank you for the trust You put in Joe, now it's time to put that trust in Kamala. Love, Jill. That handwritten note to those who never wavered. Who's she sending a message to?
And hat tip there to our Annie Cohen, who highlighted that to me. She's talking about all those people who pushed out President Biden, as Bob was just talking about, the people who were putting the pressure on the door that tough weekend in Rehoboth, and who were saying, essentially, if you don't make the decision, we're going to help you make it for yourself, which is to say there's more coming. What Joe Biden is saying is there were lots of people who were not putting that pressure on him and still believed in him, in keeping with that long history, that there's a core person to believe with in there. That's a pretty striking statement.
And for many in the Democratic Party, Joe Biden had become, and the issues that he was having communicating what he had accomplished had overshadowed the ability to focus on the issues. And Ed, this campaign is going to be about the economy. It's going to be about money, people's pocketbooks. It's going to be about immigration, all of that. And I know you're taking a closer look at those issues tonight, because I think people want to know, what is the difference on these issues between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump?
Yeah, and look, the contrast is sharp. She's, of course, a 59-year-old woman, former prosecutor and senator who would be the first female president. Donald Trump, 78 years old, a businessman and former president, and would be the oldest commander-in-chief ever by the time he ends a potential second term. And when it comes to issues voters worry most about, Harris and Trump are far apart.
I will proudly put my record against his any day of the week.
4 months from now, we will have an incredible victory.
Immigration and border security remain a top concern.
The invasion at our southern border, we will stop it, and we will stop it quickly.
Former President Donald Trump and other GOP critics call Vice President Harris the so-called border czar. But President Biden asked her to focus on the root causes of immigration, not border security. A visit to Central America and Mexico in 2021 was widely panned.
Do not come. Do not come.
She supports the president's decision to use executive authority and restrict border crossings, and illegal crossings from Central America are down significantly from when she visited. Trump says if reelected, he'd restart construction of a border wall, move to end so-called birthright citizenship, and deport millions of undocumented immigrants. Access to abortion services is a top focus for Harris.
This is a health care crisis, and we all know who was to blame. Donald Trump.
He nominated 3 justices that voted to end Roe v. Wade. Now, Trump says he wouldn't sign a federal abortion ban, believing it's up to each state to decide. Hoping to avoid the issue, the Republican National Committee even watered down mentions of abortion in the official GOP platform. And Trump's running mate, J.D. Vance, has a more restrictive view, as he's supported a national abortion ban in the past. Harris wants to restore federal abortion protections.
When I am president of the United States, and when Congress passes a law to restore those freedoms, I will sign it into law.
On the economy,
we will end the inflation nightmare that you would have never had. We had no inflation.
Trump has laid out several specifics. He'd like to cut the corporate tax rate and has made a direct appeal to working-class voters.
When I get to office, we are going to not charge taxes on tips, people making tips.
He wants to impose a 10% tariff on all U.S. imports, a move economists warn would lead to higher prices for consumers.
He intends to give tax breaks to billionaires and big corporations and make working families foot the bill.
As a senator, Harris voted against Trump's U.S.-Mexico-Canada trade deal. She's quickly adopted Biden's focus on the middle class.
Building up the middle class will be a defining goal of my presidency.
But just a few days in, she's not yet said what she'd do to fight inflation and boost the economy. On foreign policy, Trump often says the war in Ukraine wouldn't have happened with him in office.
I could stop wars with a telephone call.
He and Vance have said the war isn't of vital interest to the U.S. In the Middle East, Trump also supported Israel's fight against Hamas, but has also criticized Benjamin Netanyahu's leadership. Harris is closely involved in Biden's handling of the wars in Ukraine and the Middle East. Alongside him for most of his national security briefings, she's also attended key global conferences around the world and met with hundreds of world leaders, including 6 meetings with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in the last 2 years. And we get a chance to see how Harris and Trump would fare on the world stage starting tomorrow when she meets with Prime Minister Netanyahu here in Washington. Then he's headed down to see Trump at Mar-a-Lago on Friday, Nora.
Thank you, Ed. That was nice to hear the contrast between the two of them. Thank you so much. And up next, from money to memes, we're going to take a closer look at Kamala Harris's momentum and how former President Trump is reacting.
Just a few months, the American people will choose the course of America's future. I made my choice. I've made my views known. I would like to thank our great Vice President Kamala Harris. She's experienced, she's tough, she's capable. She's been an incredible partner to me and a leader for our country. Now the choice is up to you, the American people.
President Biden tonight explaining not just why he won't run again, but why he endorsed his Vice President, Kamala Harris. And we should note campaign donations are surging now that the vice president has risen to the top of the ticket. Deep-pocketed donors and millions of grassroots voters are putting their money on the table. The campaign saying today they've raised $126 million. But will it be enough to keep up with Donald Trump's own growing war chest? Our senior business correspondent, Jolene Kent, has the story.
We are not playing around.
Campaign contributions are flooding in for Vice President Kamala Harris.
I had over 400 texts, emails, and phone calls from people saying, I want to raise money, I want to donate money, how can I help?
Pretty crazy, yeah.
John Hennis is the former finance director for Harris's 2020 presidential campaign.
And I actually see this short amount of time between now and the election to be a good thing, because we are all coming together as a party.
This after some of the party's big donors hit pause in the wake of President Biden's disastrous debate performance.
With the COVID, with dealing with everything we have to do with.
But when the president stepped aside on Sunday and endorsed Harris, the message from donors was, let's bleeping go.
There was a lot of LFG texts. And,
Alexandra Acker-Lyons raises money for female Democratic candidates.
Walk me through those early hours.
Just people coming out of the woodwork. Okay, I'm in. What do I do? How do I give? Where do I give?
Since Sunday, the campaign says it's raised more than $125 million, the largest haul in the race so far, plus $150 million donated to the super PAC Future Forward, with nearly 900,000 grassroots donors giving for the first time this cycle.
As soon as I heard Kamala was on the ticket, I got on, I donated so fast.
Harris was the only option. I am thrilled to have donated to her.
Kamala Harris being a woman, being a person of color, being young, it is my first time donating.
We are seeing everyone from the $10 donor to the $1,000 donor showing their support for the vice president.
She's never backed down from a challenge.
Harris has also inherited $240 million that's been controlled by the Biden campaign.
We trust women to know what is in their own best interest.
She and her running mate can use Biden's campaign funds because she was already running with the president.
From the moment we take back the White House from...
And the pressure is on. The Biden campaign fell behind Trump in cash on hand for the first time last month, as the former president drew the endorsement of some Silicon Valley billionaires like Elon Musk.
I think you're seeing a lot of money pouring into Trump's campaign because they want deregulation on, for AI, the internet, and all that stuff.
Hollywood director and Democratic donor Rob Reiner.
What are your colleagues and friends in Hollywood telling you about what they think of Vice President Harris?
Well, they like her. I mean, I hosted Vice President Harris a couple of weeks ago here at our house. Billy Crystal and a number of other people said, wow.
Ultimately, in this election, we each face a question.
And here's one more wow. One major Democratic donor told CBS News the candidates may spend $1 billion each by Election Day.
There is zero question in my mind that we will raise all the funds that we need to make sure that the vice president's message gets out there.
Former President Trump has a massive war chest. Can Vice President Harris catch up?
Yeah, there's no question.
So now that Harris is the likely nominee, that Hollywood freeze on checks that went down after the debate, that's definitely thawed. We saw George Clooney endorsing Harris after calling on Biden to get out of the race. You also have Rob Reiner saying he's going to be making additional donations alongside his wife, even Beyonce, letting Harris use her freedom song. So there's a lot of engagement now back from Hollywood, both coasts, multiple Democratic donors tonight telling me they were happy with that speech from the president.
You're our business and technology correspondent. And one of the other interesting things about Kamala Harris is the memes. I mean, she is just going viral on a number of fronts.
Yeah, Democratic donors are telling me that they like how memeable Kamala Harris is. They say it will hopefully work with younger voters. Also want to note that today Harris made the case for Black women voters and really drawing the contrast between herself and former President Trump. And another interesting group that we are following, Indian Americans have become the largest group of Asian Americans and most politically active. And you can expect to see her and Usha Vance, the wife of a possible second lady, making the case to the Asian American community as well.
Thank you. And John, what about how Donald Trump has tried to pivot now that he's running against Kamala Harris?
Well, the first thing he's done is he's blamed her for every possible bad thing in the Biden presidency and the heartbreak of psoriasis. I mean, she's blaming him for everything. The second thing is she's a liberal, San Francisco. That's a traditional attack. I think the third thing will be Joe Biden said the stakes were so high, that's why he had to get out of the race. Donald Trump and Republicans will say, wait a minute, you had to get out of the race because your party didn't think you had the capacity to stay in the job. And Kamala Harris was there, and there's a cover-up. And then finally, we should remember that the president, and there was reporting today about Republicans warning their own people to watch out for sexism and racism. This is the president who rose to office by being the country's chief birther, raising questions about where Barack Obama was born. That is in his bones, and that is surely a move he will go back to. It's obviously a risk for him.
He did say tonight, people think I'm going to be nice after I was nearly assassinated, but I'm not going to be nice. That's what he said. And so then he proceeded to level a number of these attacks that you mentioned. All right, coming up, how Biden's departure from the 2024 race evokes memories of the chaos in 1968. And this picture just in from the Oval Office as the president made his remarks tonight. You can see he was surrounded by family, his son, Hunter Biden, and his wife, Ashley Biden, his daughter and her husband, as well as the First Lady of the United States. But we're told the entire Oval Office was packed with family and close friends tonight. Now this, Mark Twain once said, history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. President Biden's stunning decision to not seek re-election is certainly historic, but as our Mark Strassman reports, it also echoes another president's choice in another turbulent year, 1968.
Tested many times this past year.
Revolt clawed at Lyndon Johnson early in 1968, an unpopular incumbent targeted by fellow Democrats. Sound familiar?
2024 is very reminiscent of 1968 for a variety of reasons.
Historian Mark Updegrove is president and CEO of the LBJ Foundation. We spoke about striking parallels between Presidents Johnson and Biden and between 1968's America and today's.
Mood of the country. Divided, tempestuous, a lot of extreme rhetoric. We had the same thing in 1968, and that we were being shaken to our very foundations.
Especially divisive then, Vietnam, America's sons and daughters dying in Southeast Asia. CBS News' Walter Cronkite was a turning point. The most trusted man in America declared the war was unwinnable.
It seems now more certain than ever that the bloody experience of Vietnam is to end in a stalemate.
Johnson believed losing Cronkite on Vietnam meant his re-election was also unwinnable. In March 1968, he quit the race.
I shall not seek, and I will not accept the nomination of my party for another term as your president.
Updegrove says that decision, like President Biden's to step aside, was more than political. There were health concerns.
LBJ truly believed that he might jeopardize the country because his heart might fail.
But Democrats have to wonder whether 1968 is also a cautionary tale.
In the race to keep the Oval Office, look at what happened once LBJ stepped aside.
First, a double tragedy.
Memphis today is officially in mourning.
Martin Luther King murdered in Memphis. Robert Kennedy.
Now it's on to Chicago, and let's win there. Thank you very much.
Gunned down in a Los Angeles hotel kitchen.
We can achieve nothing by lawlessness and divisiveness.
When Butler, Pennsylvania happened, did you think to yourself, another similarity?
Without question. Just as in 1968, you had the feeling that anything could happen next.
Like Chicago's 1968 Democratic National Convention. Outside, mayhem. Cops bloodied anti-war protesters in the streets. Inside, rancor.
But don't push me, take your hands off of me.
Divided delegates nominated Hubert Humphrey, LBJ's vice president. Mr. Biden has endorsed his VP, Kamala Harris.
I seek to lead a great nation.
Humphrey, wounded by chaos, lost in November to Richard Nixon. Today's Democrats, mindful of party history, meet in their national convention next month, again in Chicago.
Biden opting not to run for the presidency again could unite the Democratic Party.
Which of the parallels resonates most with you?
What our democracy looks like today, but we should also remember that we came out of 1968 ultimately a stronger, better nation.
A nation again shocked by a sitting president, feeling scorned, bowing out. Mark Strassman, CBS News, Austin.
And we are once again trying to keep up with the history that keeps unfolding before our eyes. Our coverage will continue on CBS News 24/7, your local news, and for some of you on the CBS Evening News. This has been a CBS News special report. For all of my colleagues at CBS News, I'm Norah O'Donnell.